A serger has 4 spools of thread coming up from the top, and 2 of them go under the machine and come up through special loopers. These are loopers under here, and the threads go according to this pattern through all of these guides and holes and come up through 2 loopers. 2 of them come down and go through the 2 top needles. So that's one way a serger is different than a sewing machine. You have to thread these in order and exactly according to this picture. The order goes from right to left. You have to always start with this one and go left to thread it correctly. This is a finger guide that guards you from touching the needles, but it doesn't guard you from this knife. There's a knife right here that cuts the fabric. That's one of the reasons a serger is very different from a sewing machine. It will cut the fabric, it will overcast the raw edge that it cut, and it will sew it all at once. You can sew a seam on a serger. I recommend sewing the seam on a machine and then serging the seam allowance. It gets a better, stronger stitch. But one stitch that we like to learn to do on the serger is just to finish the edges. So if we were going to cut a corner out of this fabric, we would have some inward corners and outward corners to serge. A serger can sew without fabric under the needle. It can sew and then you run the fabric on. This is hardly cutting any raw edge. This was kind of bad tension too. You can cut as much as you want off of the raw edge. You can guide it to a number over here and cut off an inch or 2 or 8 or whatever you need to. And you can cut your own thread. When you come around, it will cut its own thread. The best way to do a square corner is to sew one side, then come back and sew the other side. And I always like to cut the serging thread about a 1/2 inch too long, then pull it into a knot, and then cut it short. If you were to cut it right on the edge, these can fray out and leave it undone. But you can make it not. So I'm going to do 2 more sides of this square, or this Utah-shaped square, and sew over them. But the knife, if you'll notice, is about 5/8 of an inch in front of the needles. So it cuts it before it sews it. So if I wanted to sew around this corner without cutting anything, I'm going to have to stop before the knife cuts that edge. Now to get around the corner, I've got to bring the corner around to me, but I don't want to stitch this tuck in. There is also a presser foot lifter that lets me get that tuck out of the way. And then I can keep sewing straight. But when I come back to look at it, it actually sewed in that inward corner. A knot is cut it off about a 1/2 inch long, pull on several of the threads until they all form a knot. And then when they've made a knot, you can cut off the excess, and that will stay.